We continue to follow a double homicide in Columbus that has drawn national attention.
After an Ohio dentist and his wife were gruesomely gunned down just 2 weeks after their 5th wedding anniversary, there was one question on everyone's mind: why? Now, an ex-FBI agent is suggesting that a years-long, deep-seated resentment and hatred is to blame for the sickening act, as the couple's grieving family reveals they are not surprised by an arrest in the case. Here's what you need to know. Spencer Tepe and his wife Monique were found dead in their Columbus home on December 30th, soon after celebrating their anniversary, authorities said. Spencer, who was 37 years old, suffered multiple gunshot wounds, while Monique, who was 39, was shot at least once in the chest, according to police records. Their 2 children, a 4-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son, were found unharmed inside the home. The violent attack happened between 2 and 5 a.m. in the upstairs of the home, cops said. No gun was discovered at the scene, and there was no sign of forced entry. Chilling 911 calls offered further insight into the horrific scene, as frantic friends who rushed to the house for a wellness check saw a bloodied body and heard a child scream. And Spencer's employer called 911 after becoming alarmed that he hadn't shown up for work.
This individual, Spencer, works with me, and he did not show up to work this morning, and we cannot get a hold of him or his family. Like, he is always on time, and he would contact us if there was any issues whatsoever. I just don't know how else to say this. Like, we're very, very concerned because this is very out of character.
If you're drawn to the stories hidden in the shadows, subscribe to Dark Corner True Crime, where every case has a secret waiting to be uncovered.
December 30, 2025 began as an unremarkable winter morning in Columbus, Ohio, until an ordinary day turned into one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in recent memory. What started as quiet concern soon unleashed a nightmare that would shatter a family and grip an entire community. On that Tuesday morning, friends and colleagues became alarmed when Dr. Spencer Tepe, a 37-year-old dentist, did not show up for an early appointment at his dental practice. His absence was out of character for someone known as punctual and dedicated. When repeated calls went unanswered, someone in his circle decided that something was very wrong and asked police to conduct a welfare check at the Tepe family home in the Wineland Park neighborhood. Officers arrived around 10 a.m. at the modern house where Spencer lived with his wife, 39-year-old Monique Tepe, and their 2 young children, a 4-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son. What they discovered inside was shockingly violent, inconceivably personal, and hauntingly silent. Upstairs in a bedroom, both Spencer and Monique had been shot to death, their lives cut short in a brutal and targeted attack. The scene was grim. Multiple gunshot wounds marked their bodies, and no obvious signs of forced entry were visible. There was no broken glass, no indication of a burglary gone wrong, and nothing of obvious value was missing. A chilling detail that steered investigators away from theories of robbery or random violence. In a separate room, the couple's 2 young children were found alive and physically unharmed, a detail that sent shockwaves through the nation when revealed. Their small bodies were wrapped in blankets, their eyes wide and confused, too young to understand that their parents would never wake again. Even the family dog was unharmed. As first responders processed the scene, one question loomed larger than any other. Who could carry out such a calculated attack in the middle of the night, leave 2 innocent children alive, and vanish without a trace? At that stage of the investigation, Columbus police confirmed they were treating the deaths as a double homicide, explicitly ruling out a murder-suicide and stating that signs pointed to intentional, targeted violence. This was no random crime. This was personal, and it was just the opening chapter of what would become one of Ohio's most discussed and deeply tragic cases. In the immediate aftermath of the Tepe murders, Columbus police launched an intensive investigation. The calm of the neighborhood had been shattered by the violent deaths of Spencer and Monique Tepe, and the community demanded answers. Officers combed through the Tepe home, meticulously photographing and collecting evidence, while forensic teams worked to piece together the exact sequence of events. Every detail mattered, from the trajectory of the bullets to the absence of forced entry. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence emerged from neighborhood surveillance cameras. Though the footage was grainy, it captured a figure moving near the Tepe home during the early morning hours. The timestamp placed the individual in the vicinity of the house between roughly 2:00 a.m. and 5:00 a.m., hours before the bodies were discovered. Investigators noted that the person appeared deliberate and cautious, avoiding obvious exposure to cameras or neighbors. This suggested premeditation rather than a spontaneous attack. Police also interviewed neighbors and friends. Accounts were consistent. No loud disturbances had been heard the night of the murders. The quietness of the attack, combined with the fact that the children were left alive, deepened the mystery. Why spare the children? Why target only Spencer and Monique? These questions haunted investigators and the public alike. By early January, attention turned to persons of interest connected to the family. Law enforcement revealed that the suspect was someone with personal ties to Monique Tepe. The investigation culminated in the arrest of 39-year-old Michael David McKee, Monique's ex-husband, and a vascular surgeon from Illinois. Police confirmed that he had traveled to Columbus around the time of the murders, and that evidence linked him directly to the crime scene. McKee was subsequently charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, indicating authorities believed the killings were planned and deliberate. Investigators also noted that he waived extradition back to Ohio, signaling cooperation in returning for prosecution, but the motive remained officially unconfirmed. Speculation suggested lingering resentment from Monique's previous relationship with him, but police cautioned that the investigation was ongoing, and no definitive motive had yet been publicly established. For the Tepe children, the ordeal was only beginning. Though physically unharmed, they would carry the trauma of losing both parents in a single night, a stark reminder of the personal cost behind each headline. As the community processed the shocking details, Columbus law enforcement continued their search for all remaining evidence that could provide a fuller picture of that fateful night. With the arrest of Michael David McKee, a complex and troubling narrative began to emerge, casting new light on the Tepe murders. McKee, 39, a vascular surgeon from Illinois, was not a stranger to Monique Tepe. He was her former husband, a connection that immediately drew investigators' attention. The revelation of a personal link between suspect and victim shifted the case from a random act of violence to a deeply personal, targeted attack.
Third reporter for the defendant is present in custody.
Your name, sir, for the record?
Michael McKee.
Have you had a chance to speak with him?
Yes, Your Honor.
What's your position at this time?
Yes, at this time, Your Honor, on behalf of Mr. McKee, I will assert his right to counsel. I will assert his right to remain silent. And Mr. McKee believes that the most expeditious manner in which he may defend himself against the charges pending in Ohio and to plead not guilty would be to waive his right to an extradition hearing and to have a governor's warrant and to agree to his immediate transportation to Ohio.
Understood, thank you. We will set this matter then for 2 o'clock on Monday for status on the transfer.
Thank you.
Anything else we can do today?
Not from this one.
Thank you, Kirk. Thanks, everyone.
According to court records, McKee had traveled to Columbus around the time of the murders, giving authorities a critical timeline that placed him in proximity to the Tepe home. Law enforcement discovered that he had waived his right to contest extradition, agreeing to be returned to Ohio for prosecution. While this cooperation may have streamlined the legal process, it did nothing to explain the violent precision of the killings that claimed Spencer and Monique's lives. Investigators described the crime as carefully planned, noting the absence of forced entry, the leaving of the children unharmed, and the lack of any apparent theft. These details reinforce the idea that the murders were motivated by personal grievance rather than opportunistic crime. Police refrained from publicly confirming a motive, but sources close to the investigation suggested that unresolved tensions from McKee and Monique's previous marriage may have been a factor. People.com. The arrest also prompted questions about McKee's life and character. As a trained surgeon, he had access to skills and knowledge that made him capable of meticulous planning. Friends and colleagues described him as professional and focused, yet the violent actions attributed to him painted a chillingly different picture. A man capable of compartmentalizing his public persona from his private vendetta. Meanwhile, public attention remained fixed on the Tepe children, who survived the attack but now faced an uncertain future. Mental health professionals emphasized the long-term trauma children experience after witnessing the death of their parents, even indirectly. Support services were immediately mobilized, but the case highlighted the devastating human cost behind the headlines, turning a cold criminal investigation into a profoundly personal tragedy. As McKee awaited trial, Ohio authorities continued to gather evidence, including digital communications, travel records, and forensic analyses, all aimed at establishing motive, premeditation, and the full scope of his involvement. For the community, the case remained a stark reminder that sometimes the deadliest danger comes not from strangers but from the shadows of the past. As the investigation into the Tepe murders deepened, law enforcement faced the challenge of assembling a complete picture of the events that had shaken Columbus. The deaths of Spencer and Monique Tepe were brutal, calculated, and deeply personal, leaving detectives to untangle the who, the how, and the why behind the crime. One of the most critical breakthroughs came from surveillance footage collected from nearby homes and street cameras. The grainy but telling videos captured a figure moving deliberately near the Tepe residence in the early hours of December 30, 2025. The individual appeared to survey the area, avoiding obvious exposure, and left the scene without drawing attention. Investigators noted that this behavior signaled premeditation, suggesting the perpetrator had planned the attack carefully rather than acting on impulse.
To this case, so we don't want to jeopardize the ultimate goal of conviction. But what we can say, this was a targeted attack.
Columbus police confirming this video of a person of interest walking towards the Tepe's property is Monique's ex-husband, Dr. Michael McKee, now charged with their murders. Columbus police say video of McKee's car was seen in the area before the time of the murders, leaving shortly after. 8 years after their divorce, McKee's motive remains unclear.
Can you tell us if McKee and Mrs. Tepe had any contact leading up to this incident, months, weeks?
Any stalking concerns there?
Again, what we can share with you, we are sharing with you. There are some things that we can't share for investigative purposes.
Police tell us there were no complaints or reports filed against McKee prior to the attack. No indications of him disturbing the Tepes. But how did McKee access their home?
Unfortunately, we're not able to talk about that at this moment.
Meanwhile, forensic teams conducted a painstaking sweep of the Tepe home, examining everything from bullet trajectories to fingerprints and DNA evidence. The absence of forced entry suggested the suspect had access or knowledge of the home, reinforcing the theory that the murders were carried out by someone known to the family. This detail became a cornerstone in linking Michael David McKee, Monique Tepe's ex-husband, to the crime. Investigators also explored digital evidence, analyzing communications, travel records, and online activity that might provide motive or opportunity. McKee's movement into Columbus, coupled with his personal connection to Monique, strengthened the case that the murders were intentional and targeted. Though authorities refrained from publicly stating a definitive motive, the pieces of the puzzle were aligning. This was not a random act, nor a crime of chance. As the story unfolded, the community watched closely, grappling with a shocking reality. Violence could strike even in familiar, seemingly safe neighborhoods. News outlets amplified every detail, sharing images of the quiet street and recounting the harrowing night that left 2 young children suddenly orphaned. Law enforcement, meanwhile, faced pressure not only to bring a suspect to justice, but also to protect and support the surviving children, whose trauma was just beginning. The Tepe case became a high-profile example of modern investigative work, where surveillance, forensics, and careful analysis intersected to solve a crime rooted in personal history. The investigation was far from over, and every revelation hinted at the depth of planning and the chilling motives behind one of Ohio's most disturbing double murders. By early January 2026, the Tepe murder case had captured national attention, and the focus shifted squarely to the suspect, Michael David McKee, and the legal path ahead. McKee, 39, a vascular surgeon and Monique Tepe's ex-husband, had been arrested and charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, a charge that reflects both the premeditation and the extreme violence of the crime. McKee waived his right to contest extradition, agreeing to be returned to Columbus, Ohio, to face prosecution. While some observers interpreted this as a sign of cooperation, prosecutors maintained that the case would be handled with the utmost rigor. They emphasized that McKee's professional background as a surgeon did not shield him from the consequences of the violent acts he was accused of committing. His calm demeanor in court contrasted sharply with the brutality of the crime, heightening public fascination and outrage. At the same time, community reaction intensified. Columbus residents struggled to reconcile the shocking violence with the familiar, peaceful neighborhood where the Tepe family had lived. Neighbors described Spencer and Monique as caring, hard-working parents, and the knowledge that the killer was someone personally connected to the family made the tragedy even more unsettling. Discussions on social media and local forums reflected both grief and anger, as people debated motives and speculated on how the murders could have been prevented. Meanwhile, attention turned to the Tepe children, who were left to cope with the unimaginable loss of both parents. Authorities coordinated with child welfare and mental health professionals to ensure they received care and support. The case highlighted the profound ripple effects of violent crime, reminding the public that victims extend far beyond those whose lives are directly taken. The prosecution team faced the challenge of presenting a clear, compelling case in court. With surveillance footage, travel records, and forensic evidence linking McKee to the scene, the foundation of the case was strong. Yet, questions remained about motive, intent, and premeditation, critical elements that would be central to a potential conviction. As the trial date approached, the Tepe murders became not just a local tragedy, but a national conversation about personal vendettas, domestic violence, and the capacity for carefully executed violence within familiar circles. For investigators, prosecutors, and the community, the case was a stark reminder that the most dangerous crimes often come from those we think we know best. The tragic story of Spencer and Monique Tepe is a haunting reminder of how violence can erupt from personal connections, leaving devastation in its wake. What began as a quiet December morning in Columbus, Ohio, ended with a family torn apart and a community grappling with shock and grief. The calculated nature of the murders, the deliberate targeting of the parents while sparing their children, and the personal history of the suspect, Michael David McKee, combined to create one of the most chilling domestic homicide cases in recent memory. Law enforcement's investigation showcased the importance of methodical, evidence-driven work. From neighborhood surveillance footage that captured the suspect's movements to meticulous forensic analysis of the crime scene, investigators pieced together a timeline that led to McKee's arrest and the eventual charges of aggravated murder. Every detail, from the trajectory of the bullets to the absence of forced entry, reinforced the conclusion that these killings were planned and deeply personal. For the authorities, the case underscored the challenges of distinguishing between random acts of violence and crimes fueled by personal vendettas. The human cost, however, extends far beyond evidence and court proceedings. The Tepe children, spared physically but forever impacted psychologically, remain at the center of the story. Experts emphasize that losing both parents in a single violent incident can have lifelong effects, influencing emotional development, trust, and the sense of safety. The community's response, from neighbors offering support to organizations providing mental health services, highlights the importance of collective care in the aftermath of such crimes. For viewers of Dark Corner True Crime, the Tepe murders illustrate a stark truth. The most dangerous threats often come from within familiar circles, rather than from strangers in the night. The combination of premeditation, access, and unresolved personal conflict made this crime uniquely devastating. While justice for Spencer and Monique will ultimately depend on the outcome of McKee's trial, the case also serves as a broader lesson on vigilance, the warning signs of unresolved domestic conflicts, and the profound effects violent acts have on children and communities. As this story continues to unfold, we invite you to stay informed and reflect on the human stories behind the headlines. If you found this breakdown informative and compelling, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Dark Corner True Crime for more in-depth, factual coverage of high-profile cases. Your support helps us bring these stories to light and ensures that the victims' stories are remembered. The Tepe murders are more than just a headline. They are a somber chapter in Ohio's history, a cautionary tale of personal vendetta, and a reminder of the resilience required to confront and survive tragedy. Through careful investigation, public awareness, and community support, we honor Spencer and Monique's memory while striving to understand the dark corners where violence can emerge.